Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts, Sylvia and Stuart Richardson. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us.
I'm very privileged to have Bruce Gagnon on the line. He's a coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. Bruce has been a longtime union organizer and lifetime peace advocate and writes for a blog called Organizing Notes. Hey, Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart. Good to be with you again.
Now, recently, Joe Biden had his State of the Union address, and he likened himself to almost Winston Churchill. He seems that that's what he's running on, and he's so proud of supporting Ukraine. Can you talk about what the United States gets out of supporting Ukraine and so-called supporting democracy in Ukraine?
Well, I don't think the United States really gives a darn about Ukraine. They're using Ukraine as a hammer to get at Russia. They want regime change in Russia, and they want it because of, I would say, climate change. The Arctic ice is melting, and Russia has the largest land border with the Arctic, and the Western resource extraction corporations want to drill up in that area. They want to take their lumber and their minerals and everything else, but they can only do that if they can successfully balkanize Russia, break it up into smaller countries. And so this is why they're constantly trying to create war with Russia. You know, if you just look it up on the internet, in the last 500 years, Europe invades Russia just about every year. Sweden did it 2 different times. France did it 2 different times. The Nazis, Hitler, Germany did it. They all lost. And now the U.S. and the Allies are doing it together. Don't we know by now that all the wars that the U.S. and its allies get involved in are resource wars? This is what's driving this whole thing. And of course, the weapons industry is making a lot of money off it, and that's how the game seems to work these days.
Now, the media would tell you, Bruce, that Russia, an aggressor state, invaded Ukraine in 2022. That's when history apparently started. How long has the Ukraine been at war with Russia?
Well, it really started in 2008 when the U.S. ran a coup d'etat in Ukraine. But then it really got going in 2014 when the United States ran another coup d'etat backed by then Vice President Joe Biden. He was in charge of the operation. Victoria Nuland, who was Hillary Clinton's Assistant Secretary of State, was the person on the ground running the show, running the operation. Immediately afterwards, the first thing the new government did was to declare the speaking of Russian illegal in Ukraine. Well, at least a third, if not more, of the country speaks Russian, especially the part closest to the Russian border, what they call the Donbass region. And so those people immediately began holding peaceful marches and gathering petition signatures saying they wanted a referendum. They wanted to be part of Ukraine, but they wanted to be somewhat autonomous. They wanted a federated Ukraine where they had local rights to elect their own local officials and speak their own language. As soon as they started doing those nonviolent protests against this new government that the U.S. installed that was backed up by the power of the Nazis who predominate in western Ukraine along the Polish border, the United States trained, equipped, directed, and everything else, these Nazis sent them to the eastern Ukraine along the Russian border to the Donbass region and began killing these people indiscriminately. I watched all of this on video almost on a daily basis starting in 2014. In 2016, I went to Odessa because they're the mothers of people that had been outside of a trades union hall in the middle of a park, had been collecting signatures, and Nazis were shipped in from the western part of the country to attack them. People ran inside of the building. The Nazis began throwing Molotov cocktails at the building, and again, I watched all of this in real time on video, and they ended up killing quite a few people. So in 2016, 2 years later, the mothers asked for people from around the world to come there to call for prosecution of people that had done these crimes. There was all kinds of video and photographic evidence of who did it. And so I went there with two other Americans, and when we arrived, the Nazis blocked off the area around this trades union hall. They had machine guns. I saw it myself. We came in on a bus, us, the international delegation, and the mothers. The Nazis were throwing rocks at the bus. So I've seen it with my own eyes. And then in 2019, I went back to the Donbass region again, to Lugansk and Donetsk, and saw the terrible devastation that they had been doing to the Donbass in the years between 2014 and 2019, shelling innocent people, their neighborhoods, their cities, and everything else. So, and it wasn't easy to get even people in the peace movement during these years. I was always trying to get them to pay attention to what was going on, but they weren't interested.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was recently having a discussion talking about all of the things that you've just been saying, and they're all very well documented, but they're not on our mainstream media. They're not being talked about. There's no voices for peace, even on progressive networks. I was talking to a colleague of mine who's usually progressive, and he said, I sound like I'm pro-Russia. I'm not pro-Russia. I'm pro-peace. I'm pro-humanity. I'm pro-Ukrainian in a sense, because how far are we going to push this? I mean, they're threatening nuclear war now, and so how far are we going to push this, and where are those voices?
Well, you know, on the same day that Russia went into Ukraine with the special military operation in February of 2022, as it turned out, I later learned that on that very same day, the U.S. and NATO were holding a war game up in the Arctic right along the Norway-Russian border. It was called Cold Response. And in fact, right now, they're doing another one of these war games up in that same area. I've just wrote about it on my blog in this past few days. Blog is called Organizing Notes, N-O-T-E-S. The other important thing in the interim period is Vladimir Putin worked really hard to try to resolve all this stuff, to bring about a federated Ukraine. And not that Russia would control the Donbass region along the Russian border there, but that it would still be part of Ukraine, but then again, there'd be this local autonomy. So with the negotiations with Belarus and France and Germany and Ukraine, they came up with the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements that called for pullback of troops from both sides, federated Ukraine, local autonomy, and everything else. But Ukraine never implemented any of these promises. And in just the past year or so, former president of France at that time and the former chancellor of Germany both acknowledged publicly, it was in all kinds of media, that we never intended to honor the Minsk agreements. And at the same time, the former president, Poroshenko of Ukraine, who was president at that time, was saying the same thing. We never intended to honor this. So Russia tried really hard for a long time during that period from 2014, after the U.S. orchestrated coup, to 2022, 8-year period, while the Russian ethnics were being slaughtered along the Donbass. Russia tried to go through this international process of agreements and everything else, and the West just played him. And he said, you know, we got played, and we're never going to fall for that again. That's what happened.
It's really tragic. In my country, in Canada, we have people sleeping on the overpasses. We have crushing inflation. People are just living paycheck to paycheck. In a lot of U.S. cities, it looks like third world countries, some of my colleagues have mentioned. And yet, we just have hundreds of billions of endless amount of weapons and money and resources flowing out of our countries to support this war that could end up in World War III. Is this because it's an election year that this is Biden's big win if he keeps this thing going? Or is it because the peace movement doesn't want peace because Trump would be against war? Like, what is happening? Are people like put their brains out to lunch for a few years, or what?
I think so. Well, they've been brainwashed, from the corporate media, from the entire West, Canada, United States, Europe, all the Western media. They were all part of the project, regime change, take control of Russia, break it up, take the resources. And if we have to go, to even the use of nuclear weapons, they seem willing to do so. Just today, I'm seeing there was a meeting between Schultz, the Chancellor of Germany, and Macron in France, and they're saying, well, we're going to put together a coalition and send long-range missiles to Ukraine that they can fire deep into Russia, hit Moscow, hit other cities, civilian targets. It reminds me of Adolf Hitler at the end of World War II when he was losing. He created the V-1 and V-2 rockets that were used to bomb European cities. It didn't really have any impact on the war, but it was a terror campaign, a chaos campaign. And so that's where the West is going. They've tried to break Russia up. They've tried to use Ukraine as a hammer to destroy Russia. It didn't work. Russia's winning, and now the West is nervous and they're embarrassed. They've bet their economies on it. They blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was bringing cheap natural gas to Germany and throughout Europe. Now in Germany, they're losing, I read, over 1 million small businesses are shutting down because they can't afford to pay electricity now because they're having to buy liquefied natural gas coming from the United States at 3 times the price of what the Russian natural gas would have cost. So Europe has shot themselves in the foot, and so now they're moving to a terror campaign in order to try to make that happen. And so Russia is saying, look, if you start sending long-range missiles that were made in France and made in Germany and made in the UK over at us, that means you've declared war on us here in Russia, and we're going to have to respond. And I think this is actually what the West wants. They want Russia to respond so that they can then further demonize Russia and excuse a World War III. They're so desperate that they've got to take Russia down, and they're willing to risk literally the whole planet to do so.
You know who has no voice, Bruce? The ordinary people of the United States and Canada and Europe, which is in ruin. The ordinary people who are paying for this, who are suffering for this. Russia's on the doorstep of Europe, so they're the ones who are going to pay firsthand, and they're already paying the cost of this. And the Ukrainians, inside Ukraine, we keep saying it's a democracy, but they've banned opposition parties. They've canceled elections. They don't allow media. Talk about how democratic Ukraine is currently.
Oh, they're a police state. They've banned the Russian Orthodox Church. They're doing everything you can imagine that is counter to real democracy. But of course, the American people, the people in Canada, the people in Europe, they don't know much about this because the corporate media in all those countries has a stake in this whole thing. And they're doing everything they can to suppress that information. The info is out there. It's out there. I put it on my blog every day. I mean, that's what I do. I go and look for this stuff, and I put it out there. I put it on Facebook. I put it in emails, and to get other people to see what's really happening. But you got to want to see it. And if you don't want to see it, then you're going to follow the New York Times and the Washington Post and and the media in Canada, et cetera, and you're just going to follow the BS.
Well, in Canada, as a side note, we have the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, and they're usually good about certain issues. But man, I was just driving home, and they were delighted to talk about all the strikes inside Russia overnight. A lot of people want to defund the CBC, and I've kind of traditionally been against that. But the more I listen to them, it's like, okay, wait a second. If we had a conservative government in power right now, you would be pulling your hair out. But now you're excited. You're a pro-war organization. So it's like, why do we have you if you're going to take sides? And I think that's what's happening. Imagine if Trump was in power and all this was unfolding. How would they be responding?
When you say strikes, you don't mean labor strikes. You're talking about
yes.
Drone strikes, missile strikes, things like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and because it's the Russian elections, I was just reading today, Ukraine has been targeting polling stations just up in the Belgorod region. It's right where Russia and Ukraine border each other. So it's very easy for Ukraine to go up there and shoot across the border into Belgorod, and they're attacking polling stations. Now, where does Ukraine get the intelligence information about what these targets, where these targets are, the coordinates and everything. Well, they're getting it from the West. They're getting it from the United States. The CIA is running the operation. They're using space technology to give Ukraine the targeting information. And the experts are saying, the military experts are saying, that the military equipment that the West has been giving to Ukraine, the Ukrainians have lost so many troops, a couple 100,000 in this war so far, that they're just putting fresh recruits out there now, and they don't know how to run any of these sophisticated drone launching operations and missile launching operations. So they're sending NATO quote-unquote advisors dressed up as mercenaries there that are helping to do the targeting operation and firing these technical systems. So this is the way it's going today, and clearly Russia knows who they're fighting. They're fighting NATO, and they're getting tired of it.
I recommend people check out your blog, Organizing Notes, but there's also a YouTube channel I follow called Military Summary, and it's a gentleman who just reviews the day by day on the battlefield with mapping and what's happening. And not only has the line not moved in 2 years, it keeps expanding, and the inhumanity of what's happening. If people just go to that website, they'll see what's happening in real time. And the Ukrainian authorities, in the same vein of what you're just saying, they're grabbing people off the street and tackling them into vans to be recruits because they're running out of soldiers. You're quite right.
It's really a real tragedy, and it's I mean, I'm ashamed of my country too, and the lies that have come, and the Biden administration is so complicit in this thing, because we have to remember that Biden was, one of the chief architects of the coup d'etat in 2014, and following it, his son was installed into the Burisma oil corporation board of directors, where he was getting payoffs, and made hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in payoffs. He didn't know anything about the oil business whatsoever, and so they were running a money laundering operation into the personal accounts of Joe and Hunter Biden, and so he's deeply involved in all of this, and so he's got to continue with this war, because if the truth ever came out, I mean, holy hell, in Congress the Democrats have been who are responsible for this war have been repressing this information left and right. Now that the Republicans have taken control of the House of Representatives, they have had some hearings where they're beginning to expose some of this information about the Biden corruption involved through this whole Ukraine operation.
It's just so sad, Bruce. I remember talking to you 10 years ago about, Bush and Iraq and Afghanistan, and we thought we were past all that foolishness, but it seems like we have a permanent war state, and both a uniparty war state, and it's so disenfranchising for people, because where do they go? What voice do they have? I wish I didn't have to do these interviews. I wish some mainstream channels would pick it up, but now we're having this kind of revolution in the media, and it seems like governments are trying to shut that down too, with like new laws they're passing that TikTok, and in my country they're passing these hate laws, but guess who determines what's hateful language? The state.
Yeah.
So it's getting kind of scary out there. So what do you recommend to people who are just feeling like it's hopeless because it's a uniparty, this is just money down the drain, and where do we go from here?
Well, I think we have a responsibility as human beings, to seek the truth and to defend justice and to go after the oppressors in every way that we can. Just today I was reading about the United States has set up a military base on a tiny island 1 mile off the shore of China. It's a Taiwanese island. There's a small chain of islands there, 1 mile off the coast of China. Now imagine if China was setting up military operations 1 mile off the coast of Canada or the United States.
Exactly.
We'd go ballistic. But now we're doing it to them. The U.S. fears the coming multipolar world. It wants to hang on to the unipolar control of the West. 500 years of Western colonization is fading quickly. The global South is taking over. So for those that are feeling frustrated and disheartened by everything, understand that the global South is rising, and they're calling on us in the West to stand with them and help defend them and prevent nuclear war aimed at the global South, who is standing up to these Western colonial powers.
Exactly. And I actually seen some of right-wingers in my country celebrating, and even the Republican Party, the state, celebrating the new president in Argentina, who's ripping everything to pieces and privatizing everything. If that's going to be a solution to to our problems, and we're on the verge of elections in Canada, and if I don't really love the government I have, but the one in waiting is very ideological and will take things, will tear everything down. You know what I'm saying? So I think it comes down to individual communities working together, trying to protect the services and speak out. But it looks like there's bleak times ahead.
In this country, we don't see much difference between the two main political parties, Republican and Democrat. We call it the uniparty.
Yeah.
And sure. Most of us who understand what's going on are supporting third-party candidates, because we ultimately know that if we don't build that third-party alternative over time, then we're just going to keep playing this lesser of evil thing over and over and over again and get nowhere.
Exactly. Someone told me once they prefer their wolves in wolves clothing. At least when we have like a right-wing party, at least we have social movements that get activated and not just go to sleep because they're
the liberals come out on the street again, don't they?
Yeah, it's not the what do we call them, the party before principles people come back out, Yeah. So anyway, how can people get in touch with your work and your notes and get in touch with you, and any final thoughts?
Well, the Global Network's website is called space4peace.org, space the number 4peace.org. And again, my blog is called Organizing Notes, and you can find that at space4peace, the number 4, space4peace.blogspot.com. So space4peace.blogspot.com. Every day I post many different things from all over the world, trying to give people an indication of what's really happening, the true story. And I put links to media outside of the Western corporate media, because I read media every day from all over the world. I got like 30, 40 different media outlets I look at every day, and where I get my information. And it's much more reliable than what we're getting here in the West.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate the work you're doing, Bruce. You've been doing this for a lifetime, trying to make things better. I would say we're not pro anything. We don't belong to political parties, and we're just pro peace. I hope I can speak for you by saying you're someone who's mostly pro peace and pro.
Yeah, and I'm pro truth. I'm pro justice. I'm pro environment, and I'm pro humanity. And I'm anti devilish barbarianism that I see today, whether it's in Gaza or whether it's in the NATO war against Russia. It's barbarism, and I think we have to call it what it is.
Yeah, the one, I guess, silver lining is that we have a world now where people can't hide that from us. If you're interested, you can get the real information. So I encourage people to check out your blog, and I thank you again for all the time you're putting towards this.
Thank you, Stuart. Always great to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Latin Waves. Latin Waves is an independently produced syndicated radio program made available for free to campus and community radios, and also to the world at latinwavesmedia.com. Please visit the website to hear previous shows, hear about upcoming events, and consider becoming a member for as little as $1 per month.